Welcome to Sex and the Suburbs, the podcast for moms to talk about sex. I'm Kaitlin McGrayus, founder of Be Her Village, and along with me is Heather Simonson, sex therapist and owner of Sea Change Holistic Wellness Center. This podcast is about all the things that don't get talked about: sex, motherhood, parenting, relationships, and everything in between. Today we're talking about post-pandemic or pandemic, back to school. God, I can't wait for it to be post-pandemic.
Right.
Back to school, back to school choices, and how we as mothers and as women and as people and parents can balance the needs of our children, the needs of our partners, the needs of our family, and our own needs and our relationship in the midst of all the things on our plate. And this came out quite organically because we were just chatting about back to school, and I started talking about the spreadsheets I'm planning.
Spreadsheets. I see lots of people are making like these at-home like mini Montessori schools, and
yes,
all the prep that goes into it, which is what you're talking about, setting yourself up for success and being, mindful and thoughtful about kind of anticipating the change that's to come, even though I don't know that even as much as we anticipate it, I don't know that will really be how prepared we'll actually be.
It feels a little bit like birth in that sense. Like none of us have, everything goes back to birth.
As it should, especially with this podcast.
But none of us have been through this before. I find myself struggling, but also kind of finding a little freedom in that. Like there's no game plan, there's no precedent, there's no, oh, well, this is what my mother did, or this is what, my generations, and this is my family. No, nobody has any map of exactly how this should be. So it's a little bit like birth. We could make plans and nobody knows. For example, the remote, this is how our conversation started, the remote versus the in-person schooling. That's kind of where everyone is juggling at this point. And even if we plan for sending our kids in school, they could be remote like that.
Well, and it reminds me, though, of when we take a yoga class and the teacher invites the person or the students to set an intention for their practice, right? So we always set, well, maybe not always, but I always set an intention for my practice, right? But does it mean that that every single moment of my entire practice is going to be in light of that intention, or might my mind start to wander, or I forgot all about it by the time that the class ended? Like we have to practice non-attachment with it, right? So we can set an intention, we can plan ahead and set ourselves up for success and not attach to what the outcome is, because we're human and we just do the best that we can. So it kind of reminds me of that. Like we're setting these intentions, we're visualizing, manifesting how we want to see things play out, how we see, school looking like, how we see our self-care looking like, how we see our relationships or, dating or what have you. What's that going to look like? So we can set those intentions, and then we just have to be sure not to attach to whatever the outcome is or is not.
I think it's a great point, and I think it's a smart way to look at it, because similar to birth, there is this difference for me when I think about the intention and the vision I have for how I want to feel and for how I want to
I love that.
be treated, or for birth it's more be treated, but when I think about my pandemic life and not even like first week of September, but like what's mid to late September how am I gonna feel? Am I gonna feel stressed out of my mind? Am I gonna feel anxious? Am I gonna feel bored? Probably not.
I little bit would be no boredom.
That would be so nice. I just spent the weekend with my childless cousins in their early 30s, and they're like, I read so many books and I was so bored. And I was like, I have no sympathy for you. I told her, I was like, Ari, I love you, but it's just not, I don't have any. But yeah, there's this like feeling of trying to set myself up for like the way I want to feel versus the details, because I can't control whether I choose remote or I choose in person. Like a lot of those details similar to birth, like epidurals and cesareans and vaginal births, and there's all these things that are out of my control. But I can control certain things, like how I care for myself and how I set myself up.
And how you respond to the things that are happening.
Yes, well, that one's the hard one.
That is the hard one.
Spreadsheets are way easier than controlling reactions and responses for me.
Yes, very true. But like in birth, right, we have this birth plan, right? That's setting an intention. We think about and invest a lot of time and energy and prep and like what we want our quote unquote perfect birth to be like. And so we do all these things and we hire doulas and we take birthing classes and we pack a bag and, you know, we learn about what a C-section is or what a vaginal birth would be or whatever it is. And then anything can happen, right? Because it's, you know, to a great degree out of our control, right? There are many things that we can control, like what we were just saying, like even how you respond to labor, right? So we can control how we feel. But I love the fact that you're framing it in a way that it's like, it's not necessarily this checklist of things that you need to have in your birth, but like what do you want to feel like in that situation?
Right. There's I'm not particularly religious, but like as you're talking, all I'm thinking is let go and let God. Like there's just this feeling of like you plan for everything you can, and then at some point
you surrender.
It's up to somebody that's not
the powers
me.
That be.
Exactly.
However the universe is gonna, you know, spin that day.
Right. And I think that's such an important thing too, is to realize that we're not in control. I mean, I think that's kind of like the answer to like 99% of our issues is that we're grasping for control. It's a lesson that keeps presenting itself again and again, at least for me. I wonder,
for most people, I think.
Yeah, I would think so, because it needs to be learned again and again. It's really hard to learn how to give that up, especially in New York. I feel like there's like a certain personality that thrives here. How do we make this conversation relevant to our podcast? How do we talk about the pandemic? And like, that's the background, right? Like we just set the scene. All right. So here we have a bunch of mothers that are trying to figure out whether they have school-age children or they have babies or they're going on maternity leave. They're trying to figure out childcare. They're trying to figure out what pandemic life that's quote unquote back to normal, which is really not any kind of normal, but it's the new normal. How does that translate into being connected, and how do we, in those plans and in those intentions, how do we stay connected with our partners and stay connected in our relationship both? And I think this is actually something to talk about. I'm saying connected. Obviously, this podcast is about sex, but sex doesn't happen, maybe? I'm like,
without
oh, wait. I'm like, hold on,
connection.
Heather. As I say words in front of you, I'm like, wait. I'm wondering what Heather's going to say. Is that the same? What does that look like? What do we have to talk about here?
Yeah, I mean, look, we can make a lot of generalizations, right? And I'm not one to generalize things. However, right, men and women's response cycles, and yes, I'm being heterosexist when I'm saying that I acknowledge that not every couple or family or whatever is a man and a woman, and this is in terms of a male and a female sexual response cycles are different, right? And we respond differently to things. And so when we say like we need to feel connected, you know, it is really common for a women's sexual response cycle to kind of need that emotional intimacy, that mental connectedness that not all men or even partners or other people necessarily need. So, but a lot of people do. And in many of the couples that I work with, that's the one thing that's missing, is that emotional connectedness, right? Before we can just kind of like get into bed, before we can really just jump into sex. And it's one of the things that comes up all the time, is that, again, stereotypically, that men can be ready for sex, and there might be men out there that like are angry about even hearing me say that.
It is alarming how fast my husband can be ready for sex.
I love how you just talk about him.
Because sometimes, whatever, we have to like work into it, but sometimes I'm literally like,
no, my husband,
hey, do you want to have sex? And like he like he's ready to go. I'm like, whoa. Yeah. Like I don't even finish the word sex, and he's like,
oh, see, for me, it's just like, it's kind of like a touch or a, you know, or a kiss or something. Although then that gets into the whole thing that like all all touch feels like sexual touch.
Yes.
And that might be another podcast.
That
like the
that would be a
importance
really good
of
podcast.
non-sexual touch and foreplay. And I'm, air quoting here, but like what that really means. So, but yes, again, stereotypically they can be pretty, I hate even saying they, right? But other people can be really ready. And
right.
I think that you and I are pretty much on the same page. Like we need that emotional connection, which is very common.
Because I need that like emotional readiness in times of stress. I don't know, because like in the beginning of the pandemic, like I think my stress response was actually to have a lot of sex, which was surprising for me. But I think in times of chronic stress, where like I'm just worn down by meeting the needs of others, aka motherhood, right? I mean, that's like, I was just talking about early motherhood, how I was just so worn down and I didn't have anything to give. I think that's a really common thing. And so it's almost like we can look at making plans and we can look at caring for others, but it's self-care doesn't sound like it's related to sex to me on the surface. But if you're caring for yourself, then you have something left and you're feeling, at least for me, feeling calmer, feeling less stressed, able to tune into my husband, able to feel
excited. You're going to be more open and receptive and like, ready to receive and to give. Right. And what did you just say that I didn't want to interrupt you, but you said something about like framing it almost as if sex was something that you were giving or that it was for the other.
Yes.
Do you remember exactly what it was?
I don't know.
No, but you said something like that and I was like, yes, it's exact. Part of it is
like I have something left to give. If I take care of myself, I'm imagining it like a cup. Yes. Right? Then you pour and you pour and you pour into your children.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
You can't pour from an empty cup. It's such a common phrase, but it really fits for me and motherhood right now. And so when I have something left, I can quote unquote give in the sexual realm.
Right. Yes. I think one of the things that happens for a lot of people, and I'm not saying that you feel this way necessarily, but it's kind of inside what you're saying, is that a lot of people feel as though that sex is, I'm giving it to them, and that it's not something that's self-care. That's where,
interesting.
That it isn't necessarily for them. That it's like, if we have sex, it's expending more of my energy.
It's something I have to pour.
It's something more I have to pour.
Interesting.
Rather than it's something that's filling us up. And that's like and especially as a new mom, when like literally we're like exuding care for another human life, trying to try to take care of our own selves, which, in the grand scheme of things is what's going to be to enable us to have like healthy, fulfilling sexual lives, which I think is part of what you were saying. But I think we tend to have this perception that being sexual with our partner is for them and it's something we're giving, and it's rather than it being, you said like that stress reliever, it's kind of beyond that, but something that's fulfilling for us rather than something that we feel like we have to give of ourselves.
So can I ask you a question related to that?
Yeah.
Is it just a matter of changing how we think about it, or is there more to, right? Is it just recognizing sex as part of self-care and it's this positive cycle, or is there something more to it?
I think it is part of that. I think it's definitely reframing where sex and sexuality falls in importance and in priority for, I guess, particularly women, and how we view that as something, as an integral part of who we are, and literally fuels ourselves as mothers. Like, it fuels our femininity. And by the way, we don't have to have a partner to have this part of our being fueled. Like, it's not like you have to have partnered sex, or if you don't, that you're somehow less than, or you can't be sexual or anything like that.
Right.
But like, so we need to be able to do that. But it's also like, if that's the experience for many people that they're feeling, then that they're feeling as though that they're giving of themselves, then it may be going deeper and looking at what's the dynamic in that partnership, and what's the quality of sex like, and do I know what I need, and am I communicating that to my partner, and is it fulfilling for me? And if it feels as though that it isn't, or that it's something that I have to do, or it's more, again, more giving than it is like I'm receiving here, then is that reflective of what's actually happening in your sex play or in the dynamic or your connection or something.
Right. Do you find that couples, it does. Do you find that couples are talking about sex? I know that's a generalization, but
it is so much of what we're going to say are generalizations, and I'll probably preface it over and over and over again because I don't believe that everything is for every.
But we have a podcast with a wide audience, so we have to have some sort of generalizing happening.
So, it's really hard for people to talk about sex. It's really, really hard, and I think last time one of the things on our last podcast I think briefly touched upon like how long it takes couples to kind of get into couples therapy or sex therapy.
Yes, that they're doing it when their children are
a lot of times older, you know, because like it winds up being put on the back burner, or maybe it's even normalized and you think that this is how it's supposed to be, or what have you. So it's really hard for a lot of couples to talk about sex, and when when we do, even my, present company included, sometimes we're so angry or resentful or whatever that it doesn't come out in a nice way, or sometimes we're afraid that we're going to hurt the other person's feelings, so we don't know how to say it. Sometimes we say it even if we're doing it mindfully and it makes the other person feel like they're doing something wrong or they're less than, or... So it's probably one of the most difficult topics, I think, for couples to talk about. So a lot of it doesn't get talked about.
That's really difficult. So that's part of what we're talking about here, right? Is like how to even think about it, what to think about, and how to maybe converse with your partner about it if you have a partner as you're preparing to go into this new normal. So what types of things, give me some tips, Heather. What types of things should I be thinking about as I'm thinking about
I think that September, right? Yeah. And I think that, I don't think, the first thing that comes into mind, and a lot of people don't like hearing this or doing it, okay? The first thing that comes to mind is that we have to schedule in our time together with our partners, right? So it's just like what you were talking about and how we started this whole conversation even pre-recording,
right?
Which is like, what are the things we're doing to prep? How are you going to schedule in time for your self-care, whether it's time with your friends or exercise or cooking or doing your favorite hobby or yoga or whatever it is, right? Like, we need to make our time together just as important, just as integral as everything else. It's literally like the foundation of our families, right? We are first as individuals, right? Then you have, if you're in a coupleship, then it's your coupleship. And so we need to schedule that time in, whether it's for date nights, and it doesn't have to be nights, by the way. In fact, many people...
I actually prefer date days because I have more energy.
Exactly, right? For some people, it's in the morning time.
Yeah.
So, like, finding what's the most optimal time for the both of you and agreeing on that, and then scheduling it in. Now, I say this all the time, and then very oftentimes it's met with some resistance of like, why should we have to schedule this? These kinds of things, and sex in particular, should happen organically. And like it's so unromantic. It's blah, 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 right? So what I always go back to is that for many people, maybe even most, when you first get together with somebody, what do? How do you get to know them? You what?
You make dates.
You date. Yeah. Like, it's the most simplest, basic thing. And think about, like, I don't remember how you met.
Dating.
Right? How was it? Did you date Kelvin before?
I did.
Right?
We had a really interesting courtship, though. We just started dating and then just were together 24 hours a day. So we're probably not the best example. Literally 24 hours
But you
a day.
said you started dating.
Yeah, but we worked together and then
so
just
you already
spent every...
Okay, I mean, mine wasn't either because I actually known my husband since I was 13, and we already had a friendship. We're not the best examples.
But people out there must date. We literally
people you date, especially on, especially like in this day and age, and especially in coronavirus world. Like, a lot of people are online dating, and they're just dating online, which I think is kind of a beautiful thing because you really get to know each other and spend more time on like talking and like quality of your communication and what have you. But I think that for many people, they date, right? And what do? You figure out what you're going to do. You set a time aside. You schedule it. Mm-hmm. And then if something comes up, a friend calls you up and says, hey, Kaitlin, you want to go, get something to eat? You're like, oh, I'm sorry, I have plans already, right? Like, you don't let other things get in the way. Mm. And we tend not to do that also, right? And then what do you do before your date?
I get ready.
Get ready, right?
I put makeup on, I put lipstick on.
So whatever, and most people get ready. And that looks differently for everybody, right? Like whether it's putting makeup on, putting lipstick on, doing your hair, wearing something special. For some, it's like, shaving or breath mints or brush your teeth. Like whatever those things are, right? Like you prep yourself. And I'm not saying that we should always constantly be doing that, but like it adds an element of excitement, like for ourselves too, right? Like that's when like the anticipation of the date and you're getting ready and like maybe you get those butterflies and and I think that's
there's a ritual to it.
It is. Yes. And so I think that people really kind of let that fall by the wayside, and that's a ritual that is really that important. My kids are walkers at their school, and I love our crossing guard. Patty, if you're out there, if you ever listen to this, you'll be so happy to know that I'm quoting you. I told you, I promised you that I would, right? So when we were talking about her relationship one day or whatever.
I love that you talk about sex with your crossing guard.
I totally do.
That's just very you.
It was more dating. It wasn't really sex. But so I asked her, she was talking about her relationship with her partner. And I do this really often when someone seems like so in love and they've been together for so long. I always ask them what their secret was. So I asked her, I was like, so what's your secret? And she said, because I treat him like he's my boyfriend. Aww. And he treats me like I'm his girlfriend. And it just stayed with me. And I was like, that's really, like, it's essential. And when we share a life together and a home and bills and we're like two ships passing through the night, jobs, family, newborn, babies, whatever, we tend to forget to do those kinds of things. And I think that's a big part of like keeping you talk about connection. That's what's going to keep the connection. Like before sex, that's the emotional foreplay.
I was going to say, we need the connection before the sex.
You need the connection.
I do.
At least I do too. I do too. I tell my husband this all the time. And a bunch more people.
Yeah.
For sure.
Not everybody, which is like a whole other mystery that I don't know. I, as someone who requires an emotional connection to even be attracted to somebody, I have a hard time understanding how that works, but I know it exists. Yeah. Because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to kind of piggyback on that for 1 second, like we're still living in a pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. And so yes, restaurants are open and people are enjoying that, and that's wonderful, and we, whatever to your comfort level. But dates don't need to mean that you're getting dressed up and going out somewhere. Just to kind of add that, you can have at-home dates, and they can be for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It's just time that you're dedicating to connecting. That can be like a card game. It could be you're going to give each other a hand massage. It could be whatever. It can be anything you want it to be.
I love that. So there's not so much pressure.
Yeah.
I remember when my kids were really small and my mom would offer to babysit like once a quarter, maybe. It was really... My mom has a very full life. But it was like suddenly... all we wanted to do was just be home without the kids. Like, there's this expectation that we should, like, get dressed and go out to eat. But, like, we were just so tired from our life with the children. And we both wanted to just enjoy the house.
Yes.
Right? Like, we have this house that we put so much time and effort into.
The fruits of your labor. Absolutely.
I wanted to just, like, sit in my living room quietly. And we would do that. We would just, like,
that's great.
Hang out. I don't know. It's I like that the expectation that dates don't need to be fancy, and like you can get ready and you can wear heels and have makeup on, but you can also just be in your sweatpants and enjoy quiet.
Yes, you can. It doesn't need to look a certain way, and I think that that's part of, our cultural norm is that like we have created an image of what a marriage is supposed to look like, or a relationship is supposed to look like, or dating is supposed to be, or parenthood, or sex.
Yes.
And there is none.
I love that. So I'm going to add that to my pandemic back to school planning for sure. That is getting a column in the spreadsheet.
Awesome.
Like date nights with my husband, or connection, or whatever we want it to look like. We actually love playing tennis, so maybe we'll just like add a tennis column in there. That would be super cool.
That's perfect.
Yes. Maybe next time we can talk about what sex actually is, because I think for a podcast about sex, that's something we should cover, because I know that there is a narrow definition and there is a wide definition. I think that would be a good place to start.
Oh, and I love to talk about that. So excellent.
Excellent. So we will do that next time.